My parents expected me to cancel my own wedding to be my grandmother's live-in nurse for free. The text from my mother came in at 4:51 a.m. while I was sitting on the floor beside Gate 22 at Portland International with my wedding dress folded into a garment bag across my knees, and the second line made my hands go numb enough that I dropped the phone into my lap. Grandma collapsed. Trip is off. I watched my fiancé Owen read it over my shoulder, watched his face move from half asleep to alert to something flat and braced. Not surprise. Recognition. We were 6 days out from getting married at a stone winery above the Douro River in Portugal. We had 41 guests holding tickets on 4 different flights. We had spent 14 months and $19,400 building one single day, and my mother had canceled it in 6 words. Her next message landed before I could get my thumb to work. You are the only one qualified to care for her. Get your things. I already let the family know we are postponing. Not can you come to the hospital. Not are you able to help. Not one question mark anywhere in it. Just an announcement and a set of instructions delivered to a 29-year-old woman sitting on airport carpet at 5 in the morning in the sweatshirt she had bought specifically to wear on her wedding trip. I had been the oldest of 3 for all 29 years of my life. I had been a licensed registered nurse for 6 of them, and I had been the unpaid staff of my parents' house since I was 8 years old. That is when my father, Glenn, bought his second tow truck and started running the night board himself, which meant he left at 7 in the evening and came back somewhere between 4 and 6 in the morning smelling like diesel and wet asphalt. That was also the year my mother, Corinne, moved from the school district front office into payroll and benefits, which she was good at, which she was proud of, and which came with a certification course 2 nights a week and a stack of binders that lived on our kitchen table for 3 years. Somebody had to run the house between those 2 schedules. That somebody was me. My sister Becca was 3. My brother Nolan was barely walking. I learned to run a washing machine before I learned to ride a bike. I know that sounds like a line somebody made up for effect, but it is just what happened because a bike is optional and laundry is not. By the time I was 9, I could sort the mail into 3 piles: bills, school, and junk. And I knew that the ones with the plastic windows went on top of the microwave and never in a drawer. By 10, I was making dinner 4 nights a week. Nothing complicated. Rice and canned chili, quesadillas, breakfast for dinner when I was tired, hot dogs cut into coins for Nolan because he would gag on a whole one. By 11, I did the grocery run with my mother at the store and my mother on her phone, which meant I did the grocery run. By 12, I kept a spiral notebook on the counter with everybody's week written out in columns. Becca had speech therapy Tuesdays. Nolan had a follow-up for his ears in March. Dad needed the truck inspected before the 14th. I wrote it all down because if I did not write it down, nobody else would, and then somebody would miss something, and then there would be a fight, and the fights always ended with somebody looking at me. I was 12 years old, and I was the reason my family functioned. There is one afternoon I go back to more than the others. I was 13. Becca had a fever of 103, and my mother was sitting a certification exam she could not walk out of, and my father was under a truck somewhere past Estacada. I called the nurse line off the back of the insurance card. I gave them her weight and her temperature and how long it had been running, because I was the only person in that building who knew any of it. The woman on the phone asked me to put an adult on. I told her there was not one. She went quiet for a second, and then she walked me through it anyway. That is the first time I ever charted anything in my life. I wrote the times and the doses on the back of an envelope so I could tell my mother exactly what I had done. Nobody ever asked to see the envelope. My parents told everyone I was an old soul. My Aunt Trish called me the little adult, which she meant as a compliment, and which I accepted as one for about 15 years. Teachers wrote responsible and mature on every report card I ever brought home. My grandmother Vera used to hold my face in both hands and say I was the steady one. Not one single person in a decade ever asked why the steady one was 12 and doing the work of 2 adults, or why 2 functional employed parents had quietly outsourced an entire household to a child, and then accepted congratulations for how well she was doing at it. The pattern did not break in high school. It just got more expensive. I could not run cross country because practice ended at 5:40, and Nolan got off the bus at 3:20, and there was nobody else. I turned down a paid summer position at a clinic downtown the year I was 16, the one that would have put me in a real building with real charts, because it was 40 hours a week, and 40 hours a week was not something I had. I went to exactly 1 school dance, and I left at 9:15 because my mother texted that Dad had a call out past Sandy, and could I be home? I was not angry about it then. That is the part that is hard to explain to people who did not grow up this way. I was proud. Being needed was the only currency I had ever been paid in, and I had a lot of it, and I thought that meant I was rich. The one that still catches in my throat is the nursing program. I got in at 17 to a 4-year program at a university a little under 4 hours north with a scholarship that covered most of it. Real dorms, real hospital rotations, a whole life with my name on it. I brought the letter to the kitchen table and my mother read it twice and set it down next to her coffee and said it was a wonderful opportunity, but it was not realistic. 4 hours is a long way, she said. What happens here if something happens there? And then she said the sentence I have thought about probably 1,000 times since. You are the glue in this family, Sadie. Glue does not get to move. So I did the 2-year program at the community college and then the bridge program at the state branch 22 minutes from my parents' driveway. And I lived at home the entire time. And I worked the front desk at a physical therapy office on weekends. And I came home every single afternoon between classes to put a load in and start dinner and check the notebook. I passed my boards at 23. I got hired onto a medical surgical floor at a hospital in Gresham, working 3 12-hour shifts a week, which is a real job with a real badge and a real paycheck. And for about 4 months, I felt like a person who had gotten away with something. Then my grandmother had her stroke. Vera was 73. It happened on a Sunday in her own kitchen, and it took the left side of her body and most of her balance and none of her personality, which is the cruelest possible combination, because it left her fully aware of everything she could no longer do. She spent 11 days in the hospital and 5 weeks in a rehab facility, and on the day she was discharged, my father drove her back to the house she had lived in for 44 years, and my mother met me in the driveway and said, well, thank God we have you. That was it. That was the whole conversation. There was no family meeting. There was no discussion of options. There was no moment where anyone sat down and asked what this was going to cost the one person in the family who happened to hold a license. There was just a sentence in a driveway, and then there were 6 years. Here is what 6 years looked like, because people hear granddaughter helps out with grandma, and they picture somebody bringing over a casserole. I worked 3 12-hour shifts at the hospital, usually Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Then I drove 26 minutes to my grandmother's house on Thursday morning, and I stayed until Sunday night. I managed 11 medications across 4 dosing times, including a blood thinner that had to be held before her dental work and restarted after, which is the kind of thing that kills people when it goes wrong. I checked her blood sugar twice a day and adjusted her sliding scale. I did the transfers, bed to chair, chair to toilet, toilet to shower bench, and I am 5'4" and she was 160 pounds of mostly dead weight on her left side, and I did those transfers alone for years because there was never a second person in the house at the hours it needed doing. I dressed a diabetic ulcer on her right heel for 14 months until it closed. I gave her a weekly injection in the back of her arm. When she had a bad autumn and needed a catheter for 6 weeks, I managed that too, and if you know what that involves, you know it is not a favor, it is a procedure. I did her range of motion exercises. I cut her toenails, which sounds small and is actually a whole thing with a diabetic. I called her doctors. I sat in her appointments and translated. I fought her insurance twice, and every single night before I went to sleep on the daybed in her spare room, I wrote it down. count. Time, dose, reading, response, skin check, intake, output, anything unusual. Not because anybody asked me to, because I am a nurse, and that is what you do. And if I had not done it, I would not have been able to sleep. Over 6 years, that filled 7 spiral notebooks that I kept in a canvas bag in the trunk of my car. I want you to remember the notebooks. In the beginning, I asked about money exactly one time. I was 24 and I had just come off a stretch of 11 days with no day off at all. And I sat at my parents' kitchen table and I said, is there anything that helps pay for this? Is there a program? Anything. My mother, who had by then moved from the school district into a billing and eligibility office for county health services, which is to say my mother spent 40 hours a week inside exactly this kind of paperwork, put her hand on top of mine and said she had already looked into all of it. Grandma does not qualify, she said. We checked. Her assets are too high because of the house. Then she said the sentence that closed the subject for the next 5 years. Family does not bill family, honey. I never asked again. I want to be very clear about something, because this is the part that people get wrong when they hear this story. I loved my grandmother. Not in the abstract way people love relatives they see at Thanksgiving. I knew the sound her breathing made when she was getting a chest infection 3 days before a doctor would have caught it. I knew she took her coffee with so much sugar it was basically a dessert and that she would lie about it. I knew which of her stories she told when she was happy and which ones she told when she was frightened. 6 years is a long time to sit in a quiet house with somebody. She was not the problem. She was never the problem. That distinction is going to matter later, so hold on to it. There was one night in the 4th year that I have never told my mother about. Vera's blood sugar went to 41 at 10 minutes after 2 in the morning. I know it was 41 because I wrote it down. She was clammy and she was not tracking and she could not follow a 2-step instruction, and I got glucose gel into her and then I sat on the floor next to her recliner and rechecked her every 10 minutes for an hour and a half until she came back up and asked me why I was looking at her like that. My father was asleep at the other end of the house. My mother was at a conference in Bend. There was no second set of hands and there was no number to call that was not 911. And if I had made one wrong call in that hour and a half, there would have been an inquiry, and the inquiry would have found exactly one licensed professional in that building. It would have found me. That is what Owen meant. I did not understand it that night, and I did not admit I understood it for 2 more years. I met Owen when I was 26. He is a paramedic, and we met the way 2 people in that world always meet, which is standing in a hallway at 3 in the morning waiting on a bed. He is 31. He is calm in a way that took me a year to trust, and he has a habit of asking short questions that take you a week to recover from. We had been seeing each other for maybe 5 weeks when I was telling him about my grandmother's medication changes over tacos, and he put his fork down and said, who signs off on her meds? I said I do. He said no, I mean on paper. Who is the responsible party of record? Who is the agency? Who carries the liability? And I sat there with my mouth slightly open because the answer was nobody, and I had never once in 3 years said that out loud. Then Owen said, so you are not helping her. You are practicing. There is a difference. I did not have anything to say to that. He did not push. He just watched. He watched me leave his apartment at 11 at night in November because my mother texted that Vera seemed off, and my mother was in the same house at the time. He watched me use 2 of my 3 vacation days that year on a colonoscopy prep and a cardiology appointment that were not mine. He watched me get a text at 6:40 on a Saturday morning that said just, she is asking for you, with no other information, and watched me put my shoes on. He watched my phone go off during a movie, during dinner, during my own birthday. Vera needs her pills sorted. Can you come by? Your father cannot figure out the machine. Are you working Thursday? We have a thing. Every one of them shaped like a question and functioning as a work order, because the alternative to saying yes was a woman I loved sitting in a chair waiting for somebody who was not coming. When Owen proposed in his truck in a grocery store parking lot because he could not wait until we got home, I said yes before he finished. And then that night, sitting on the tailgate, he said something very carefully. I want to marry you, he said. I do not want to marry your parents' work schedule. Before we set a date, I want us to see somebody, because I do not think you can see this from the inside. We spent 4 months with Dr. Helene Ashby, a licensed marriage and family therapist, with 11 years working in caregiver enmeshment and family systems. Dr. Ashby was not warm, she was precise, which turned out to be what I needed. She asked me how many hours a week I provided skilled care. I did the math out loud for the first time in my life, and the number was between 55 and 70. She asked what I was paid. Nothing. She asked whether I had ever been thanked in a way that was not immediately followed by a request. I could not think of one. She asked whether my parents had ever provided care overnight, alone, without me in the building. My father, never. My mother, 4 times in 6 years, and 2 of those she called me at midnight. Then Dr. Ashby said, do you understand that what you are describing is not caregiving? It is an unlicensed care arrangement being operated by 2 people who are not doing any of the caregiving. That is the sentence that broke something open. Unlicensed care arrangement. Not devotion, not a good granddaughter. An arrangement. Owen said one more thing in that office that I have never forgotten. He said, you have a license. Do you know what that actually means? If something goes wrong in that house at 2 in the morning, there is no agency and no supervisor and no chart. There is only your name. You are carrying every ounce of the risk and none of the authority. We set the boundary 7 months before the wedding, on a Sunday, at my parents' kitchen table, with a piece of paper I had written out beforehand because Dr. Ashby told me I would forget everything the second my mother started crying. I said I was cutting back to Sundays only. I said they needed to bring in a licensed home health aide for the rest, and that I would help interview and I would help train, and I would be on call for a genuine medical emergency, always. I said what I could not keep doing was being the entire plan. My mother cried before I finished the second sentence. Actual tears, the kind with sound. After everything this family has done for you, she said, we put a roof over your head. We paid for your car insurance until you were 22. And now you are going to walk away from the woman who raised your father. My father did not cry. He waited until she stopped, and then he said in a completely flat voice, fine, but do not come to us when you need something. Then he went out to the garage. That was it. 6 years, and the whole conversation took 19 minutes, and it ended with a threat about a future in which I would be the one asking. I remember driving home and thinking that at least it was done. At least the hard part was over. I want to be honest about how stupid that was. They had spent 21 years training me to be available, and 4 months of therapy was never going to outrun that. And they had not accepted anything. They had simply gone quiet, the way people go quiet when they are waiting for the right moment. We picked Portugal because Owen's grandfather came from a village outside Amarante and Owen had never seen it, and because I had never left the country, and because when we priced out a wedding at home for the number of people my mother said we had to invite, it came out higher than flying the people who actually mattered to a different continent. We found a quinta in the Douro Valley, a working wine estate with a stone chapel and 11 guest rooms and terraces cut into the hillside above the river. 41 guests. October 4th. We booked it 14 months out, and we paid for the entire thing ourselves, every euro of it, because I was 29 and I had never asked my parents for money in my adult life, and I was not going to start. $19,400. I know that number the way you know your own phone number. We took extra shifts. Owen picked up overtime on the ambulance. We stopped going out. We put my hospital differential and his holiday pay and every birthday check into one account with a label on it, and we watched it climb for over a year. I told my parents 11 months in advance. 11 months. I sat in their living room with the dates written on a card, and I said, this is when it is, this is where it is, and this is the window where I will be gone. I said it early, and I said it in person specifically, so there could never be a version of this where anyone claimed they were surprised. My mother took the card, looked at it for maybe 3 seconds, and said, that is a long way to make everybody travel. Then she asked whether I had seen the coupon for the pharmacy. No question about the chapel, no question about the date, no question about whether her only daughter was excited or nervous or anything at all. Just a mild complaint about the travel and then a change of subject. I told myself that was just how she was. I have thought about those 3 seconds a great deal since. There is a kind of disinterest that is genuine, and there is a kind that is a decision, and I could not tell them apart yet. The first real move came 5 weeks out. My mother called on a Tuesday evening while I was charting at the kitchen table. I have been thinking, she said, and she used the voice she uses at work, the reasonable one, the one that has already decided. Have you considered moving it to spring? And I said no, obviously not. We have deposits, we have flights. And she said, I know, but your grandmother cannot make that trip, and would you not want her at your wedding? Which was the smartest thing she ever said to me, because it was true. And because it was true, it took me 2 full days to understand it was not the point. Vera could not fly. Vera also could not have flown in spring, or the spring after that, and everybody in that family knew it. Vera had already told me herself, in her chair, holding my hand, that she wanted photographs, and she wanted a piece of cake mailed to her in a tin, and she wanted me to go. My mother was using a woman who could not travel as a reason to cancel something, and calling it sentiment. I said no. She said all right in a way that meant nothing was all right and hung up. 3 weeks out, she came back with the compromise, which is always how it goes. They never ask for the whole thing twice. They ask for the whole thing once, and then they ask for a piece, and they let you feel generous about the piece. She called and said, nobody is asking you to cancel. What if you just came home in the middle? Fly out on the 28th, get married on the 4th, fly home on the 6th, and go back later when things are settled? Come home for 4 days. Not cancel, shorten. Shorten, not cancel, shorten. As though a 9-hour flight each way in the middle of my own wedding trip was a reasonable thing to propose to a person. As though I would be doing a light errand. Mom, I said, we paid $19,400 for this. The flights alone were $4,600, and they are not refundable and they are not changeable, and I checked. The estate is paid in full. 41 people have booked rooms. I am not flying home in the middle of my wedding. And her voice did the thing it does. The one that always used to work on me. The small hurt one. I just did not think we had become an inconvenience to you, she said. I did not realize that is what family meant now. There it is. That was always the whole toolkit. Family comes first, translated out of her language, means your life is the flexible one. I held. I said, you have 3 weeks and you have my list of 3 agencies and you have my phone number for a real emergency and I am going to Portugal. She hung up without saying goodbye. Then came the silence. 9 days of it. No calls, no texts, nothing, including nothing when I texted to ask how Vera's Thursday appointment had gone, which was not a small thing to ignore. On the 10th day, my mother sent one message and then nothing again. It said, we found an agency. They want $31 an hour and a 4-hour minimum. Hope Portugal is worth it. I read that text probably 20 times. $31 an hour, 4-hour minimum. My mother sent that to me as a complaint, as a receipt for my selfishness. And what she had actually done was put a market price on the thing I had done for free for 6 years while she watched. 60 hours a week at $31 an hour. You can do that math as easily as I did, sitting on my couch at 10 at night with my thumb over the screen. The arithmetic of that house only ever balanced if my time was worth exactly $0 an hour. And the second somebody else's time got a number attached, the whole thing collapsed. I want to put the 2 numbers next to each other one time and then leave them alone. $19,400 for a wedding. Saved over 14 months by 2 people picking up extra shifts. Spent on a thing that happens once. $31 an hour with a 4-hour minimum, which is what the open market said one day of me was worth. 6 years, 60 hours a week. Run that number, and then tell me who in that house had been generous to whom. My mother sent me that text to make me feel small. It is the single most useful thing she ever gave me, and I did not know it yet. I did not answer. Owen and I flew out of Portland on September 28th at 6:20 in the morning, connecting through Newark and Lisbon. I had told my parents the flight numbers. I had emailed the itinerary. I had written down the name of the estate, the address, the landline, and the 2 windows where I would be genuinely unreachable, because I am the person who writes things down. My mother had not responded. My father had not responded. Becca said she would see us there. Nolan said he would see us there. That was the whole send-off. We got to the airport at 4:15 a.m. because Owen is incapable of arriving anywhere late, and we checked the dress at the counter and they made me gate check it, and then we sat down on the floor by gate 22 because every seat was taken. And at 4:51 my phone lit up. Grandma collapsed. Trip is off. I did not think. I called. She answered on the first ring, which I noticed even then, because that is not what somebody in a hospital corridor does at 5 in the morning. What happened? I said. Is she okay? Where is she? And my mother said, finally, in a voice that had absolutely nothing frightened in it, not one thread of fear, just heat. Where have you been? I have been standing in an airport for 35 minutes. I said. Mom, where is Grandma? She collapsed in the hallway yesterday. My mother said. She could not get up. We had to call somebody. It was terrible. She needs care. She needs you. You are not getting on that plane. And I heard the whole architecture of it in about 4 seconds, because I have spent 6 years listening to how people describe medical events, and hers had no nouns in it. No hospital name, no time, no blood pressure, no imaging, no doctor, no diagnosis, no word about whether she had hit her head, which is the first thing anyone who has ever cared for a stroke survivor asks. Yesterday, I said, this happened yesterday, and you texted me at 4:51 this morning. There was a pause of about a second and a half, and in that second and a half, I stopped being frightened and started being something much worse. Which hospital? I said. She is home, my mother said. So she was seen and discharged. She was seen, my mother said. And then louder. Do not do that. Do not use that voice on me. This is your grandmother. Mom, I said, I need you to hear the actual question. Was she admitted? Yes or no? And my mother said, you are not a doctor, Sadie. And then, with no transition at all, she went to the bottom of the bag and pulled out the last thing in it. If you get on that plane, do not bother coming back to this family. I will tell every single person we know exactly what you did. I will tell them you left a 79-year-old woman on the floor to go drink wine in Europe. And you know what? They will believe me, because I am the one who will be here. The gate agent had started boarding group 2. Owen was standing up with both of our bags on his shoulder, watching me, not saying anything, letting me choose. I said, I love you, and I love her, and I am getting on the plane. And I hung up on my mother for the first time in my entire life, and my hands did not stop shaking for an hour. We landed in Lisbon at 9:35 in the morning on September 29th local time, after about 17 hours of travel. I turned my phone off airplane mode while we were still taxiing, mostly out of habit, and it took maybe 40 seconds to find a network. Then it started. It did not buzz once and stop. It buzzed continuously for close to 2 minutes, long enough that the man across the aisle turned around and looked at me. 31 messages, 16 from my mother, 5 from my father, 4 from my Aunt Trish, 3 from my Uncle Cal, 2 from cousins I had not spoken to since a funeral in 2019, and 1 from a number I did not recognize at all. Every single one sent while we were over the Atlantic, which is the detail I keep coming back to because it means they were sent to a phone everyone knew was dark. They were not communication. They were a record being built. My mother's ran in a sequence I could have written myself. Grandma is asking where you are. She is in pain. I hope the wine is good. I have never been so ashamed of a child in my life. You have thrown away everything this family did for you. And then, at the bottom, time stamped about 6 hours after the others. I am filing a complaint with the nursing board for patient abandonment. I sat in seat 24C with my thumb over that message while the seatbelt sign went off around me and people stood up and pulled bags out of the bins, and I felt the floor tilt. Because here's the thing about a license. It is not a certificate on a wall. It is the entire thing. It is 6 years of school and 2 boards, and every hour I have ever worked, and every hour I will ever work. There is no version of my life that survives losing it. My mother knew that. She had sat at my capping ceremony and cried about it. Owen took the phone out of my hand and put it in his own jacket pocket and said, "We are getting our bags, we are getting the car, and you are not going to read any of that until you have had water and slept." He was right, and I did not listen, and I read all of it in the rental car on the A1 with the Portuguese countryside going past my window like a screensaver I was not looking at. We got to the Quinta at 4 in the afternoon. There is a photograph Becca took of us that day, standing on the terrace with the river below us and the terraced vines stacked up the far bank, and I have looked at it many times since. Owen is looking at the view. I am looking at my hands. That night, I called my grandmother, not my mother, not my father. I called Vera's own cell phone, the flip phone I had bought her and taught her to use, and she answered on the 4th ring the way she always did, saying hello like it was a question. "Sadie," she said, and her voice was completely normal. "Are you there yet? Is it pretty?" And I sat down on the floor of a stone bedroom in Portugal, and I said, "Grandma, I need you to tell me exactly what happened Sunday." She was quiet for a second. She said, "I got dizzy in the hallway and I sat down on the floor because that is what you told me to do, remember? You told me sit down before you fall down. And then I could not get back up on my own, and your father helped me up. That was it." "Did you go to the hospital?" I asked. She said yes. They took her in. They did some tests. They said it was a urinary tract infection. They gave her an antibiotic, and they sent her home the same afternoon. Same afternoon. She was home by 4:30 on Sunday. Not admitted. No imaging of her head because she never hit her head. No collapse. No emergency. A UTI in a 79-year-old woman, which causes dizziness and confusion, and is one of the most common and most treatable things that happens to a person that age, and which I had personally caught and treated in her twice before. And my mother had held that for a day and a half and then texted me at 4:51 in the morning at the airport with the word collapsed. "Grandma," I said, and my voice came out strange, "did Mom tell you my wedding was postponed?" Vera said, "She told me you were coming home. She said you were on your way." I put my hand over my mouth so she would not hear me. And then my grandmother, who could not lift her own left arm, said the kindest and clearest thing anybody said to me that entire month. She said, "Sadie, I have been sick for 6 years. I am going to be sick next week too. Go get married. Send me a picture of the dress." Becca found me on the terrace the next morning. She is 24 and she has spent her entire life being the one nobody needed anything from. And she sat down next to me with 2 coffees and said she had been trying to figure out how to tell me something since the airport. "Mom told all of us you were coming home," she said. "She told Aunt Trish and Uncle Cal and both of Dad's brothers that the wedding was postponed and that you had already agreed. She told them Sunday night." Becca said, "She told them before she told you." I sat with that for a long time. My mother had announced my decision to 11 people before she had informed me of it, which means that when I said no at that gate, I was not declining a request. I was contradicting a statement she had already made publicly. And everything that came after it, every text, every relative, every accusation, was not an attempt to change my mind. It was cleanup. She had already spent the money and I was refusing to cover the check. The texts did not stop. They multiplied. My Aunt Trish, who had not been in the same room as Vera in 2 years, wrote paragraphs about duty. My Uncle Cal wrote, "Your mother is destroyed, fix this." Cousins weighed in with opinions about my character. Somebody I have never identified called the station where Owen works and told the shift supervisor that Owen had convinced his fiancée to abandon a disabled elder, and Owen's supervisor, who has known him for 9 years, called him and said, "This is very strange. What is happening in your life?" By the 3rd day, I was getting somewhere between 40 and 60 messages a day, and every single one of them said the same 4 things in different arrangements. Selfish, ungrateful, abandoner, not who we raised. On the 5th day, somebody posted on the public page for my hospital unit, not a review of the hospital, a paragraph about me by name, saying a nurse on that floor had left her own disabled grandmother without care to go on vacation, and asking whether the hospital knew what kind of person it was employing. It was up for about 9 hours. My charge nurse screenshotted it and sent it to me with 3 words. "This is insane." And I sat on a terrace in Portugal at midnight reading my own name in a stranger's sentence. My mother has never admitted she wrote it. She has also never denied it. And the accusation in it did not even hold together, because in the story my mother was telling everyone, a neglected woman was still living in a house with 2 adult children in it, and not one single person who read that post ever stopped to ask where those 2 were. On October 1st, 3 days out from my own wedding, Owen found me in the bathroom of the Quinta at 11 at night, sitting on the tile with my phone face up, and he sat down across from me and said, "They are not going to stop, and you are not going to be able to do this alone. We need somebody in our corner today. Not next month. Today." We found Dr. Nadia Ostrom through an online directory that night, a clinical psychologist in Salem with 17 years in family systems, caregiver exploitation, and coercive family dynamics, who took telehealth appointments and had a cancellation. We did the session the next morning at 7 our time, sitting on the edge of a bed in Portugal with a laptop on a chair. I talked for close to 40 minutes. Dr. Ostrom did not interrupt once. She took notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I want to name 3 things for you, and I want you to write them down. 1. What you are describing is not a family asking too much. It is a household that has been structurally dependent on unpaid professional labor for 6 years and has now discovered it cannot function without it. 2. The event on Sunday was real, and the description of it was not. Escalating the severity of a genuine minor illness in order to compel someone's return is a coercive control tactic, and it is deliberate. 3. The relatives contacting you are not independently outraged. They have been briefed. That is a recruitment pattern, and it is designed to make you feel like the entire world agrees with your mother, when what is actually happening is that your mother has spoken to 11 people, and you have spoken to none." And then Dr. R. Ostrom said the thing that changed the next 6 months of my life. She said, "I want you to document everything, every text, every voicemail, dates, times, exact wording, and I want you to preserve every record you have of the care you personally provided. Do not delete anything. Do not paraphrase anything." She said, "If this escalates further, you are going to need to be able to prove what you did, and more importantly, what they did not." I told her I had 7 notebooks in the trunk of my car. There was a pause, and then Dr. Ostrom said in a completely different tone, "Sadie, do not let anyone into that car." I thought at the time she was being dramatic. We got married on October 4th at 5:30 in the evening in a stone chapel that has been standing since before my country existed, with the light coming in gold and sideways off the river, and I am not going to spend much time on it because that day belongs to us and not to this. I will say 2 things. Becca cried harder than I did. And at the reception on the terrace, Owen's grandfather's cousin, an 86-year-old man who spoke maybe 9 words of English, held both my hands and said something long and warm that nobody translated. And I have decided I do not want to know what it was. My parents did not come. They had never intended to come. Their tickets, which I discovered later, were canceled called on September 6th, 3 weeks before my mother told me she was hoping we could work something out. The next morning, October 5th, my mother sent a photograph of my grandmother sitting in her chair looking small and tired, with a caption that said, "This is what you chose." And underneath it, the nursing board complaint is filed, reference number and everything. Enjoy the honeymoon. Owen looked at it for a long time and then said, "She does not understand what she just did." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You have never been employed as her caregiver. There is no agency, no contract, no supervisor, no shift, no pay." He said, "In order to accuse you of abandoning a patient, she has to first establish that you had a patient. Who does she think has been operating that arrangement?" He was closer than either of us knew. At 2:14 in the afternoon on October 6th, sitting on a terrace in the Douro Valley 2 days into being married, I got a call from a Salem, Oregon area code. I almost did not answer it. A man's voice said, "Is this Sadie Ballard?" I said it was. He said, "My name is Curtis Vane. I am an investigator with Adult Protective Services. I am calling regarding a report we received Friday concerning a vulnerable adult named Vera Ballard." And then he said the sentence that ended my parents' lives as they had built them. He said, "The report names you as her designated caregiver of record. Can you tell me about that arrangement?" I said, "Mr. Vane, I do not have that arrangement. I have never had that arrangement. I am a registered nurse. I am her granddaughter. There is no agency, there is no contract, there is no employer, and there is no pay." I said, "I am in Portugal. I got married on Saturday." There was a silence on that phone line that went on long enough that I checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. Then Curtis Vane said, in a much slower voice, "I am going to ask you some questions, and I would like you to take your time." He asked who administered her medications. I said, "Until 7 months ago, me." He asked who did her wound care. Me. Her injections. Me. Her transfers. Me. Overnight coverage. Me. 4 nights a week for 6 years. He asked what my parents did, and I sat on a stone wall above a river 8 time zones from home, and I could not come up with an answer that took more than 4 words. "They lived there," I said. He asked whether I had any documentation of the care I had provided, and I said, "I have 7 notebooks, 6 years, every day, times and doses and readings and skin checks, in my handwriting, in the trunk of my car. And I have 5.5 years of hospital badge records that show exactly which hours I was on a medical surgical floor in Gresham and which hours I was not." Curtis Vane asked me to repeat that. Then he said, "Ms. Ballard, I want to be extremely clear with you about your position. You are not the subject of concern here. You have no legal duty of care to an adult relative in this state. A person cannot abandon a patient they were never professionally assigned." He said, "The complaint alleges that you were the designated caregiver of record. That is a specific claim with a specific meaning. And in order to make it, the complainant made a number of statements about how care in that household has been organized for the last 6 years." He said, "Those statements are what I am going to be looking at." Then he told me there would be an unannounced home visit within 48 hours, and he asked whether I would consent to release the notebooks. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I called Dr. Ostrom that evening. I said, "APS is investigating my parents," and she called them because she was trying to get me in trouble. Dr. Ostrom was quiet, and then she said something I have repeated to myself probably 100 times. She said, "Sadie, if an investigation finds problems, it is because the problems were already there. You did not create anything. You were a dressing on a wound, and you were a good one, and nobody could see the wound while you were on it." She said, "You took the dressing off 6 days ago, and now everyone is looking at it." Curtis Vane went to my grandmother's house on the morning of October 8th. He called me on the 10th, our last full day in Portugal, and I took the call standing in a parking lot in Amarante with Owen next to me. "Ms. Ballard," he said, "I want to update you directly because some of what we found concerns you." He went through it the way people in that job do, flat and in order. Vera was alert, oriented, and cooperative, and she was very glad to have a visitor. Her medications were in a 7-day organizer filled out in handwriting she identified as her granddaughter's, from a fill dated before September 28, and 3 of the 11 prescriptions had been out of refills for more than 2 weeks. The antibiotic prescribed on September 27th for a urinary tract infection had 6 doses remaining in a course that should have been finished. There was an early stage pressure area on her right heel that had not been offloaded or documented. She had not been showered since the 27th because, in her words, nobody knows how to do the bench. He said, "The discharge record from September 27th documents a urinary tract infection and dizziness with no fall, no loss of consciousness, and same-day discharge at 4:12 in the afternoon." He said, "The word collapse does not appear anywhere in it." And then he said, "There is a second matter, and I need to ask whether you were aware of it. Vera Ballard has been enrolled in the state's in-home caregiver program since August of the year after her stroke. That is 5 years. Under that program, a family member can be enrolled as a paid provider and reimbursed for documented hours of personal care. The enrolled providers on that file are Corinne Ballard and Glenn Ballard. The submitted timesheets total 40 hours per week, every week for 5 years. The reimbursement rate over that period averaged $16.10 an hour." And Curtis Vane said, "The total amount paid out on this file is $167,412. I did not say anything. I remember Owen taking the phone out of my hand and holding it up between us so he could hear too. And I remember the sound of a delivery truck going past. And I remember thinking about my mother's hand on top of mine at that kitchen table when I was 24. Grandma does not qualify, honey. We checked. Family does not bill family. My mother worked in a billing and eligibility office for county health services. She did not misunderstand the program. She administered programs like it for a living. She told me it did not exist while she was already enrolled in it. And every one of those timesheets, 40 hours a week, 260 weeks in a row, described care that I performed at hours when their own driveway was empty and my badge was scanning into a hospital in Gresham, or my car was parked outside my grandmother's house." Colette Marsh showed me one of the timesheets much later. I asked whether I was allowed to see one, and she thought about it for a while, and then she put a single page on the table the week of March 4th, 2 years before. 40 hours, bathing, dressing, transfers, medication assistance, meal preparation, mobility. Signed by my mother. I recognized that week the second I saw the date because that was the week I worked 5 12-hour shifts in a row to cover a colleague on bereavement leave and then drove straight to my grandmother's house on the Friday and did not leave it until Monday morning. My badge scanned into that hospital for 60 hours that week. My handwriting is in notebook number 5 for every one of the 4 days after it. Colette Marsh put the page back in the folder and said, "We have 260 of these, and they are all like this one." Curtis Vane said the file had been referred to the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit that morning. He said the notebooks would be very important. He said one more thing before he hung up, and he said it carefully, like he had thought about whether to say it at all. He said, "Ms. Ballard, the report your mother filed is the only reason anybody opened this file. It had not been reviewed in 3 years. We flew home on October 12th. I did not go to my parents' house. I went to my grandmother's, and I let myself in with the key I had carried since I was 23, and she was in her chair, and I sat on the footstool in front of her the way I had for 6 years. I told her all of it, not the version with the edges filed off, all of it. She listened without saying a word, and when I got to the number, her face changed in a way I had never seen on her in my life. And then Vera said, and this is the part that I have not been able to put down. She said, "Sadie, I asked her." And I said, "Asked her what?" She said, "Every Christmas, every single Christmas, I asked your mother whether you were being taken care of, whether you were getting paid properly for all those hours. Because I was not going to be a burden on you. I was not going to do that to you." And she said yes. She told me you were making more than than she was. She said it in front of your father. My grandmother had spent 5 years thanking me for a job she believed I was employed to do. She had been apologizing to me for being work when the work was the only honest thing in the entire arrangement. She had been sitting in that chair feeling like a line item, and the whole time she was one, just not on my ledger. On October 15th, I met Grant Isley of Isley & Boone, a family and elder law attorney Dr. Ostrom put me in touch with. I brought everything: 7 notebooks, 5.5 years of badge records, 340 pages of exported text messages with timestamps, the September 27th discharge summary, Dr. Ashby's session notes with my written release, Dr. Ostrom's assessment, and the reference number for the nursing board complaint my mother had filed against me. Grant Isley is in his 60s, and he reads with a pen in his hand, and he does not make a single reassuring noise while he does it. When he finished, he set the pen down and he said, "In 28 years, I have not had a file assemble itself this cleanly." He said, "First, the board complaint. It will be dismissed, and it will be dismissed quickly, because a nursing board's jurisdiction begins at a professional relationship, and you did not have one." He said, "Second, and I want you to understand this, you have never at any point in your life had a legal obligation to provide care to your grandmother, not at 23 and not at 29. There is no such duty in this state for an adult grandchild." He said, "Third, on the money. You have a viable claim for unjust enrichment against your parents personally, because they received payment for services you rendered, and your documentation is frankly extraordinary." He said, "I am not going to recommend you file it. Family litigation costs more than it returns, and it will take 3 years of your life, but you should know that the option is on the table, and more to the point, they should know it." He drafted the cease and desist that afternoon. It required my parents to stop contacting me and Owen directly, to stop directing third parties to contact us, to stop making false statements about me to family members, to my employer, or online, and to cease any further regulatory filings concerning my license. It went out by courier on October 17th at 11:20 in the morning. My mother called at 11:52. I did not pick up. The voicemail is 5 minutes and 41 seconds long, and I have listened to it exactly once. It is mostly not sentences. The parts that are sentences are about lawyers and about ingratitude and about how I have always thought I was better than them. She never once in 5 minutes and 41 seconds mentions the money. The nursing board dismissed the complaint on October 24th with no action and no finding in a 2-paragraph letter. The Medicaid Fraud Control Unit investigator, a woman named Colette Marsh, interviewed me twice, once for 4 hours. She interviewed my grandmother. She interviewed the discharge nurse from September 27th. She subpoenaed my badge records herself so that they came from the hospital rather than from me, which she explained was better for both of us. In February, the state issued its findings. My parents were ordered to repay $167,412 in full, assessed a civil penalty on top of it, permanently disqualified from every state reimbursement program, and referred for criminal review. My mother was placed on administrative leave from the County Health Services billing office on the day the referral letter reached her supervisor, and she resigned 11 days later before anybody had to decide anything. My father put the tow company's second truck up for sale in March. My grandmother now has a licensed aide from an actual agency, 40 hours a week, arranged by the state, paid by the program that was allegedly not available to her. Her heel healed. Nolan called me in January from a coworker's phone because he did not want it on his own, and he told me what the house had been like since October, and he told me that he and Becca had both known something was wrong for years without ever having a word for it. And he asked me, very quietly, whether I hated them. I said no. I said I just was not available anymore. He said, "I think I want that too." And I said, "Then take it." And he did, and he moved out in April. The only other time I heard my father's voice was on the last day of February, 3 days after the findings letter. I picked up because I did not recognize the number. He did not say hello. He said, "So this is what you wanted." And there it was, the whole reframe, the one they had been practicing since October. "We asked our daughter for a little help with her own grandmother," he said, "and she called the state on us." "Dad?" I said, and I was surprised at how level I sounded. "You did not ask me for a little help. Mom told me to cancel my wedding 6 days before it happened. When I got on the plane anyway, she told me Grandma collapsed, and Grandma had been discharged from an emergency room the previous afternoon with a urinary tract infection and no fall. When I still did not come home, she reported me to Adult Protective Services and told them I was the designated caregiver of a vulnerable adult. And then she reported me to the nursing board and tried to take my license. I did not call anybody. I got married in a chapel and I ate dinner and I came home. Everything the state found, the two of you wrote down and signed and mailed in yourselves, 40 hours at a time, 260 weeks in a row, while I slept on a daybed in her spare room." There was a long silence on the line. Then my father said, "Your grandmother asks about you." And I said, "She has my number and she uses it, and she called me on Tuesday." He hung up. My parents expected me to cancel my wedding to be my grandmother's live-in nurse for free. It was never free. It was $167,412, and it was in their names. And the only reason a single person on this earth ever went and looked was that my mother picked up the phone to punish me for getting on a plane. Thanks for watching till the end.